By far the most infamous continuity nightmare in comics is Hawkman. The only character that might come close to his notoriety is Donna Troy, and I think he probably is just a little bit more notable. But that infamy or notability or whatever you want to call it is what made me interested in the character in the first place. I think he's interesting, partially because he's so infamously confusing. So I went and I read a bunch of Hawkman comics, and now I want to talk about them. Because a lot of it, the Hawkman stuff on the internet, just kind of leaves out a bunch, which is completely justifiable. Like, I'm going to be talking about all the Hawkmen, all the Hawk girls, Hawkman's son, Hawkman's godson, Hawkman's sidekick, and also Hawkman's grandson. A character who, if you do not already know who it is, you will not believe is involved in this. As most continuity nightmares do, Hawkman starts pretty simple. In his first appearance, he is an Egyptologist who discovers he's the reincarnation of Prince Khufu. And, after saving his past and future wife, Shiera, becomes a superhero to track down the reincarnation of the man who killed them. That man is a priest named Hathset, who, depending on the continuity, can either possess the descendants of his priest life or is reincarnated alongside them. Here, the reincarnation is happening, and this will stick around for a long time because of the magical properties of the nth in this issue called ninth metal knife that they were killed with. They can reincarnate across time, and they've been cowboys, they've been knights, they've been all sorts of stuff. Shira becomes Hawkgirl later. Carter, the Egyptologist, stays Hawkman. If you're curious about which dynasty Hawkman is from, at one point in the early 2000s it stated he's from the 15th dynasty. Of course, there are some bits of information that contradict this. There are bits where he's stated to be in the 13th or 18th, although I do not have where this is recorded down because I didn't think I would want to have it as like a note. If you want to try and date this by the new history of the DC universe, it's not helpful. It leaves you with a 1,557 year window. So that's not very helpful. Also, just as an aside, this first issue does refer to the hawk god Anubis, which, I'm sorry, 1940s Gardner Fox. Anubis is jackal-headed. You're looking for Horus. This continues on for a while, and he joins the Justice Society, and he's just kind of a relatively successful superhero. Not a huge one, but, like, big enough. But then, like most of the World War II era superheroes not named Batman or Superman or Wonder Woman, he just kind of fades out of relevance. But then superhero comics come back into vogue in the late 1950s. And DC starts relaunching a bunch of their properties with new sci-fi twists. The Hawks were chosen to be one of them. Now, instead of reincarnating Egyptian royalty, they're alien space cops from the planet Thanagar, and their names are Qatar Hole and Shayera Hole. They're sent to Earth to pursue a shapeshifter named Bith Rock. They become museum curators and adopt the names Carter Hall and Shayera Hall as throwbacks to their Golden Age versions. After capturing Bith, they decide to stay on Earth in Midway City, which is a stand-in for Detroit, I think, to study human policing methods. If you're curious about where Thanagar is, it's in the Polaris system. Also, these hawk people can speak to birds. Then, in Flash 123, the Flash does something. Believe it or not, this simple sentence is how most continuity problems in DC Comics begin, and this will not be the last time this comes up. What happens this time is Barry Allen moves so fast that he vibrates through dimensions and meets Jay Garrick, the 1940s Flash. The specifics of the story aren't really important, but what is important is that this establishes that the 1940s versions of the characters, so in the case of Hawkman, the Egyptian Hawks, and the 1950s and 60s versions of the characters, in this case the Space Cop Hawks, exist in different universes. The 1940s or Egyptian Hawks are on Earth 2, and the Space Copper 50s 60s Hawks are on Earth 1. They will interact with each other every now and then, but for the most part, they are separate versions of the characters in separate continuities. It's worth noting that also in 1975, Space Cop Hawkman gets a sidekick named Golden Eagle. He's a random kid named Charlie Parker who likes Hawkman and gets powers randomly. Eventually, he loses these and joins the Teen Titans with a new costume that gives him the same powers. He's a fourth stringer at best there, only shows up a few times, and nobody cares about him. Golden Eagle is not the only new Hawk character in this era. There are a couple more. You see, because people were still interested in the 1940s versions of the characters, there are some books that were written in that universe. And one of these books is Infinity Incorporated. It introduced two new Hawk-related characters. The first one, and kind of simpler one, is Northwind. He is a bird-human hybrid named Norda. He is also the godson of the Egyptian Hawks. He is from a secret city of bird people named Fetheria. The city is in Greenland, by the way, and was founded by Thoth. He's the less important one. The more important one is Hector Hall, the biological son of the Egyptian Hawks. Okay, so Hector was born in Egypt. He is very related to Hathset, and this is because he was affected by the way Hathset killed the original lives of the Egyptian Hawks, and as a result was born without a soul. He's destined to be a vessel for something called the Silver Scarab, who will destroy the world. This is why Northwind is there. He's going to stop Hector. Hector creates a suit of nth metal and becomes a superhero. He is also dating and will later marry Lyda Trevor, codename Fury. She's the daughter of the Golden Age Wonder Woman and Golden Age Steve Trevor. After Crisis, where they merge the universes together, if you didn't know that's coming, it is. They introduce a Golden Age Fury to replace Golden Age Wonder Woman, and have Lyda get raised by Joan Trevor, a hero named Miss America. This later gets even more complicated when other writers bring in Hippolyta, Wonder Woman's mother, to also replace Golden Age Wonder Woman. Anyway, eventually, Hector becomes possessed by the Silver Scarab and starts working with a woman who is probably Hathset, and then gets killed by the Eye of Ra. Also, Lyda's pregnant. She goes on maternity leave right before the story arc where he gets possessed. This, currently unborn, child will be very important later. Pretty much happening at the same time as this Hector stuff is Crisis on Infinite Earths. I mentioned it a few seconds ago, but this is where things get complicated, so we're going to jump around a little bit. As a side note, a bunch of that Hector stuff did technically happen after this, but I am telling it like this, so there's a bit less jumping around. It doesn't help a lot, but it helps a little. What Crisis on Infinite Earths does is it merges the universes containing the 1940s, or the Egyptian Hawks in our case, and the 50s and 60s, or the Space Cop Hawks in our case, and merges those universes into one. So now, both exist in the same universe, although some Golden Age characters, namely Batman, Wonder Woman, and Superman, get replaced by other characters or just kind of disappear. And after this, the Golden Age characters get shunted off to fight in Ragnarok for eternity. When Hector learns this, he doesn't care, mostly because his possession is starting at this point. Also, by the way, Golden Eagle is still around. He dies in a Teen Titans comic. Also, there is a Hawkman run immediately post-Crisis. No one ever really talks about it for some reason, mostly because it's pretty definitively non-canon and only serves to make things even more confusing. It continues pre-Crisis storylines, and I'm not really going to be talking about it. Just keep in mind that this is also another layer of weird complications on this character. This is also where things start to get really complicated. And it's kind of hard to tell things in chronological order from here on out. I'm going to do my best, but it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be some things that are out of sequence a little. You see, after Crisis on Infinite Earths resets the continuity and merges the universes, the Space Cop Hawks are around on Earth. They interact with the Justice League early in Justice League history. It's basic, but they're there. Then there's this limited series called Hawk World. It tells their origins on Thanagar, reforming it as a pretty nasty imperialist power. It's nice and simple. It's very good and worth reading. I'm not really going to tell you a lot about it as a result. One weird thing about Hawkworld that nobody really ever mentions is the two Shiera Thals. There's the older one, which is a contemporary of Qatar. She's racist, and she dies in a bombing. She doesn't really do a lot. The younger one is a girl that gets adopted by her father after the older one dies, gets renamed Shiera, later turns out to be her father's granddaughter. It's very weird, but it's just kind of another layer of nonsense. It barely comes up again after this. Around the same time, there is also this event called Invasion. I feel pretty comfortable saying that this event's main legacy is Hawkman continuity problems. During it, the Thanagarians are part of a coalition of aliens that invade Earth. The Hawks help stop them. Here's Hawkman helping Animal Man. Surely this doesn't cause any problems. Anyway, Hawkworld was pretty good and people liked it, so it's time for another Hawkman ongoing. This one's written by John Ostrander. It's pretty good, also titled Hawkworld. You should read it. It's not quite as good as the limited series, but that's a pretty high bar. This book tells the story of how the Hawks first arrive on Earth. The justification for this is that Thanagar is setting up diplomatic relations after invading Earth. It's set in the present day. The Hawks are already on Earth, and we're learning the story of how they first came to Earth in the present day. There's another set of Space Cop Hawks on Earth already. Someone needs to do something about this. Before we really get into that, I want to have two side notes. One, the new Hawks are based in Chicago. That's not really important, but I think it's sort of interesting. And two, Space Cop Hawk Girl, the most recent one, the one that is just arriving on Earth, not the one that was on Earth before, is now Hawkwoman. I will be referring to her as such from this point onward for simplicity's sake, because that is generally what she is referred to from this point onward. Anyway, how this gets resolved is that the Justice League Space Cop Hawkman is now a Thanagarian spy named Fel Andar. He technically existed for a little bit pre-Crisis and was in that out-of-continuity Hawkman book that was immediately post-Crisis. So that's a fun fact. And Justice League Space Cop Hawkgirl is a woman from Earth named Sharon Parker. Her mind got wiped and she was brainwashed into this. They were working to undermine the Justice League and Earth as a whole for the Alien Alliance while pretending to be the son and daughter-in-law of the Egyptian Hawks, who were in Ragnarok and could not have disputed it. Hawkgirl learns about this deception, so Fel Andar murders her for it. She manages to tell Martian Manhunter and Amanda Waller about this before she dies, and then Fel Andar leaves Earth with the other Thanagarians after invasion. The reason I'm bringing this up now is because this is when it is revealed. Before we get too much further, though, there are a couple of small things I want to mention. First is that Hawkwoman has some funky stuff going on. Her grandmother is Hyathis, here spelled Hyanthus, who is a plant woman alien queen who ruled Thanagar for a bit pre-Crisis. The plant woman part doesn't really ever come into play, and it's not actually clear if she is a plant woman in this specific version of her. And frankly, Hyanthus doesn't matter much either. It's just a little fun fact. Also around this time, Qatar starts using Qatars, which are a type of Indian weapon. This is a little cheesy, but it's fun. Anyway, there's basically only one set of Space Cop Hawks now. Surely this cannot get worse. There's also a bit in here that also no one ever seems to mention. I kind of want to talk about it for a second. Hawkwoman appears to die. She's actually fine. It's just a weird mind swap with this guy named Count Viper. a psychic French noble who has been body hopping since he died during the French Revolution. Also, while we're here, I would like to go on an interesting tangent. Space Cop Hawkman is part Cherokee. This is because his Thanagarian father visited Earth, fell in love with a woman, and took her back to Thanagar with him. They met because they were both working with the Egyptian Hawks at the time. She eventually returns to Earth. I think this makes Hawkman the first DC character that is native to headline his own self-titled book. I'm not entirely sure because I'm not terribly familiar with DC's Western or war or mostly non-superhero lines. There may be someone in there that actually has the title. You may be tempted to bring up Tomahawk, but the Tomahawk version that had a solo comic is a white man, and the native Tomahawk is post-Flashpoint, so it had not happened yet. I think Hawkman takes it, but I'm not entirely sure. Anyway, the Egyptian Hawks are out of that dimension of eternal fighting alongside the rest of the society, and now they can be used in stories. This surely can't make anything weird. But before we get into that, I have to talk about Hector Hall again. You see, when his body died, his consciousness did not. This has been a thing for a while. I'm just talking about it now because I think it's a little easier here. Instead, he was abducted into the Dreaming by Brute and Glob, where he was made the Sandman. He's actually pretty creepy here. He appears in the middle of the night and just watches Lyta and visits her in her dreams. It's really weird. Also, it's not his body. It's the body of a guy named Garrett Sanford, who was previously Sandman and then went insane and killed himself. And it's been modified to look like Hector. Anyway, Hector takes Lyta into the Dreaming where they get married. Inside, her pregnancy stops advancing. Eventually, this comes to the attention of Morpheus, or Dream of the Endless, who kills Hector and then lays claim to Lyta's baby. This baby eventually becomes the new Dream of the Endless at the end of the book. This is relevant, I promise. Anyway, since the Hawks were confusing, and specifically Hawkman, DC decides that they need to fix this. There are too many Hawks, and they are all different. So, in 1994, during an event called 0 Hour, they merged Qatar, Carter, Shiera, and a Hawk God into one being. You'll see this occasionally referred to as Hawk God. I'm not going to do that because there is a Hawk God involved in this version of Hawkman. I'm just going to call it like Composite Hawkman or something along those lines. As a side note, people claim that Hawk God, the component, is a Native American god. I think this might be related to the fact that Space Cop Hawkman, or Qatar, and his mother is the one who explains this. This is not true. If anything, it is a knockoff Phoenix Force that is also maybe Nth Metal itself. It was trapped and used to power Thanagar's floating cities and technology. It can also induce madness in anyone using Nth Metal. Also, Hawk God, the component, is dubiously stated to be responsible for the creation of all the Hawkmen. That does include Carter. Also, it is the Hawk Avatar and is part of the Red, a separate thing I am not getting into right now. If you're wondering what happens to Hawkwoman during this, she sticks around but doesn't have powers or equipment. Because they wanted her around but not to have powers for whatever reason. She just kind of disappears into the background for a bit. Eventually, the past lives of Egyptian Hawkman start arguing in Composite Hawkman's head. Not Egyptian Hawkgirl's past lives. Those just kind of go unexplained until much later. Anyway, this happens because one of the past lives of Egyptian Hawkman made a deal with Neron, who is the devil, to become like the person in charge of Composite Hawkman's body. This attempt failed, but the lives still stuck around, and the constant argument and noise made by them makes Composite Hawkman become violent and temperamental. And then some of his past lives eventually escape and possess someone else, and then they go about killing people until Composite Hawkman gets arrested by Martian Manhunter, who then accidentally psychically absorbs all the souls. Then, with the help of Hawkwoman and Arion, who is an ancient Atlantean sorcerer who is in the present for some reason, the souls all get transferred back into Composite Hawkman, who then disappears from the face of the planet. Composite Hawkman will never return. Anyway, since Composite Hawkman failed, DC declared the Hawks radioactive and instituted the somewhat famous Hawk embargo. This means that people cannot use the Hawks. I know of two things this has affected, one much more documented than the other. The one that is much more documented is Grant Morrison's JLA. They supposedly originally wanted Zoriel, the new Angel member of the team, to be a Hawkman, and were told no. The other and much less documented one is James Robinson's Starman, which is one of my favorite comics and is worth reading. But anyway, this ban eventually gets relaxed, as pretty much evidenced by the already mentioned 2000 Legend of the Hawkman book, which, by the way, that book probably isn't canon. The Space Cop Hawks are the protagonists, and they have a baby at the end. This story is never referenced again. If you remember that Hector Hall died when he got killed by Dream, he was not dead for good, as one may expect. When the Justice Society came back as a main title, it needed a version of Dr. Fate. After Jared Stevens, the previous holder, is murdered, a mysterious someone really wants that helmet and gear. So there's this baby born from a mysterious woman in a hospital, and then he magically ages up before fighting the powerful evil magic god Mordru, who reveals that Lyta is still alive, by the way. This kid, if it's not obvious, is Hector. And Hector concludes that the mystery woman that gave birth to him is Lyta because she's under a spell that's hiding her identity and keeping her comatose. Hector decides to help her.
In the same story, there's also a new Hawk Girl introduced.
Egyptian Hawk Girl has escaped limbo somehow and has reincarnated into a girl who killed herself. I'm gonna be honest, I could not find a way to phrase that one well. This girl is Kendra Saunders, who is Egyptian Hawk Girl's grandniece. This pretty much just returns Kendra to life with a few memories of Shira's. She becomes Hawk Girl, and she rather understandably does not take this revelation very well.
But really, everyone knows that you can't have a Justice Society without both Hawks. So Hawkman is coming back.
On a mission to Thanagar, which is devastated, Hawkman is brought back from limbo. Except it's just Carter this time. Qatar died in limbo, with his memories becoming incorporated into Carter. There are a couple other things during this time period that I want to mention. The first is that the nth metal in Egyptian Hawkman's origins is now from a Thanagarian spaceship. It's also worth noting that in the storyline, Thanagar was ruled by a demon called Onamar Sin, and that despite Hawk God being responsible for powering Thanagar's flying cities, they are still around from this point on, despite Hawk God not being there anymore. Eventually, Hector finally makes a breakthrough on his second wife's mother. Surprise, surprise, it is not his wife. That would be even weirder. No, he's actually the child of Hawk and Dove. More specifically, Dawn Granger and Hank Hall. This was done as part of a plot by Mordru, who wanted to possess the perfect body. Hector possessed this body instead. Hank Hall, despite having the codename Hawk and the last name Hall, and also being very confusing, is otherwise completely unrelated to Hawkman. Also, there's a kind of important Black Adam storyline around this time that heavily features the Hawks. This is where Northwind, if you remember him, he's the bird guy who is Golden Age Hawkman, or Egyptian Hawkman's godson. He reappears. He's working with Black Adam now and can't speak. He barely even interacts with Carter or Hector. At the end of the story, he stays with Black Adam, and that's kind of the end of him. I think he's only cameoed since. Anyway, during this storyline, Hector finds out that his wife is being held by Nabu, who is the Mesopotamian god and a cosmic force of order, and he powers Dr. Fate's helmet, and he's doing this to manipulate Hector. Hector and Lita meet up again and live happily ever after until they briefly get trapped in hell and then freeze to death on a mountain. Then their consciousness goes into the dreaming to meet their son. This is the end of Hector and Lita. They've only cameoed since. Mostly Hector. Happening more or less concurrently with this is a new Hawkman ongoing. The one notable Hector thing in that is that Hector briefly gets roped into the cycle of reincarnation. This goes nowhere, and nobody ever addresses it again. Also, Hawkwoman comes back. It's brief, but she's around now. Anyway, the hard to follow part of this run is that a little bit in there is this story that reintroduces a bunch of old Hawkman villains who are working together to kill Hawkman.
The more important part of the storyline, however, is that it reintroduces Golden Eagle. He's now just a rich guy who is alive again, and he credits his nth metal armor for that. Then, Hawkman dies fighting some Manhawks unleashed by the villains, and after that, Charlie reveals that he is Hawkman's son and becomes Hawkman himself.
After 2 issues, it's revealed that Carter is alive, and it's also revealed that when Charlie said he was Hawkman's son, he wasn't actually Carter's, he was Fel-Andar's. His real name is Chal-Andar. He's mad at Thanagar's treatment of Andar. He is the son of Andar and Sharon Parker, who, if you don't remember, is the woman Andar brainwashed to become Hawkgirl. They were in love before the brainwashing, and Sharon was explicitly brainwashed, partially to erase her memories of Charlie so Thanagar wouldn't think Andar was a liability. Andar is also the source of the power-granting costume that Charlie used, and also the person who saved his life. Carter and Charlie fight. Carter wins and sends him on a ship to Thanagar, destroying one of his eyes in the process. Then, the Rann-Thanagar War happens. I'm not really going to go into the causes of this because they aren't that relevant. The short version is that Thanagar and Rann are now in close proximity, and Onamar Sin is up to some stuff. The 2 planets go to war, and the Hawks get involved. During this, Hawkwoman gets killed by Blackfire, who takes control of the Thanagarian Alliance after Sin's death. Eventually, in the aftermath of this, Charlie meets Carter again. He's got a cyborg eye, and is a Thanagarian war hero because he saved a lot of wives during the conflict. Charlie also meets his father here. Fel-Andar is a monk or something. He's become religious. It's not entirely clear what his role is. He talks down some Thanagarians and gets Charlie to team up with Carter. Then Fel-Andar gets killed by Blackfire. Carter stays in space for a bit to help out in the aftermath. This does mean that both sets of Space Cop Hawks are dead now, leaving only the Egyptian Hawks, even though Egyptian Hawkman has the memories of the non-evil post-crisis Space Cop Hawkman because they were the same person for a bit.
Starting at issue 50, the Hawkman ongoing gets retitled Hawkgirl, and really only one thing of note happens here.
At the end of the book, Kendra's body becomes Kendra's completely for the first time. She-Ra leaves it. Much later down the line, Charlie will reappear in 3 issues of Countdown to Adventure. This is a very, let's call it an interesting story. First, he fights a woman named Forerunner who abducts him to have sex with him. He consents to the sex, but not the abduction. Then he just kind of hangs around with her, and they have sex until he leaves at the end of the book, and then he doesn't appear again for a decade. Also around this time, I'm really just mentioning it for completeness' sake. Nobody pays any attention to this, so you can ignore it. There's a point where Hawkman, specifically Carter, is told he's Qatar whole with fake memories of reincarnation. This doesn't go anywhere and is basically just a footnote. There's also a very minor continuity kerfuffle here. The Hawks die during Final Crisis and then are just alive again for Blackest Night, where they die and become evil space zombies for a bit before returning to life at the end. Except when they return to life, they are the original Egyptian versions, meaning Kendra is dead and now it is Shira in Shira's body. Also, as a side note, the corpses of Khufu and Chayara, their original lives are in space helping power the Star Sapphire's power battery, which is fueled by love. And when they get reanimated as space zombies during Blackest Night, they destroy that battery. Then, during Brightest Day, they go on an adventure where they fight Hathset. During this, Hathset gathers all of their previous lives' corpses and makes a portal with them. This takes them to a place called Hawkworld, not to be confused with the comics, named Hawkworld. This is a interdimension like realm. It's a realm that acts as an intermediary between Earth and Thanagar that has a lot of nth metal, and Earth and Thanagar used to trade it in the past or something. It's not very clear. Anyway, during this, Hathset claims the Hawks dying to the Black Lanterns is the first time he hasn't killed them. I'm pretty sure he's wrong. Anyway, then Hathset dies, and his queen and co-conspirator, the still living mother of Hawkgirl's first life, takes an army of man-hawks, which are hawk humans, to Zamaron, the planet that is home to the Star Sapphires from earlier. There, she gets possessed by the Predator, the cosmic entity of love, and the Hawks kill her, but not before she tells them that since they've killed Hathset, this is their last life. Then they become wind for a few issues. Then they're normal again. Then Shiera's wind, and Carter's the only one around. This is never explored again because the Flash is about to pull something. In 2011, Barry Allen resets the universe, bringing the Wildstorm and Vertigo continuities into the main canon. There's a little more to it, but that's not important here. What is important is that continuity has been reset for everybody but Batman and Green Lantern, which itself is a not at all confusing decision that causes absolutely no problems whatsoever. And, contrary to popular belief, Hawkman is not a Batman or Green Lantern character, so now he's just Egyptian Hawkman with some stuff from Space Cop Hawkman. Then he's revealed to be Space Cop Hawkman, who thinks he's Egyptian Hawkman. Also in this new universe, Hawkgirl is now the Queen of Thanagar. She's called Lady Hawk with an E. She and her very evil brother are in a ship that goes into the sun where they die. There's also another Hawkgirl on Earth 2. Don't worry about either version of Hawkgirl here. They don't matter from this point on and pretty much just exist to make this more confusing. Then there's this book called Death of Hawkman where, shocker, Hawkman dies. Believe it or not, it is actually more of an Adam Strange story than a Hawkman one. This book features Rand and Thanagar going to war for at least the fourth time, even though I've only mentioned one of them. This time, this war is orchestrated by the psychic alien conqueror Despero, who wants nth metal. Despero devastates Thanagar. Hawkgirl is on the cover of one of these issues, by the way. She does not appear in it. How Hawkman dies, though, is at the end of the series, Hawkman gets the nth metal stripped out of his body, killing him.
This being comics, both Hawks promptly return. They're the Egyptians this time.
Hawkgirl is specifically Kendra, and Carter is a giant evil thing, but he gets better. Kendra is also the leader of the Blackhawks, which she and Carter helped create to protect the world. As part of this reappearance, it is also established that the Hawks are much older than they were before. They are now some of the first humans and are contemporaries of Vandal Savage. They're connected to this weird lore thing of the first tribes of humanity, the Hawks being from, of course, the Hawk tribe. Now, Hathset simply recreated their murders in a ritual that made them forget all of their lives before that point. The process of them learning this also is what leads to Carter becoming the World Forger. And Hawkwoman is also around during this time. She's just kind of in space. What matters here is that Hawkman gets a solo series, and this series somehow resolves just about everything you heard up to this point that isn't related to Golden Eagle or Hector Hall. Genuinely, this is an achievement, and Venditti should be praised for this. Okay, so the way Hawkman gets fixed is that it is explained that the Hawks are not just reincarnating across time, but also across space. This means that the Space Cop Hawks are now both past lives of the Egyptian Hawks, despite them being contemporaries. In addition to this, they both have had hundreds of new, forgotten lives. The relevant ones here are Sky Tyrant, who we'll get to in a moment because I like him and I want to talk about him, Shura, and Qatar Deathbringer. We're going to start with Qatar and Shura. These are the first two lives. Qatar is got a bit more to him. He's the first life of Hawkman, and he serves the Lord beyond the void, who is just kind of an eldritch god from another dimension. What Qatar does for him is he acts as a Deathbringer, who are warriors that cull the populations of populated planets and gather some survivors as slaves to help bring their god into reality. Eventually, Qatar gets disillusioned with this and starts seeing Shura, a mysterious red haired woman, at the site of every slaughter. Eventually, they talk, which convinces him to rebel against his god, dying in the process and destroying the mechanism that would have transferred the Lord beyond the void into the main universe. This also banishes the other Deathbringers to the realm that the Lord beyond the void is from. Then he wakes up in a field of skulls with a voice telling him that he can either accept divine judgment or be reincarnated until he saves as many people as he has killed. This is where Sky Tyrant comes in. He is from Earth 3, which is the inverse morality world, and he is a reincarnation of Hawkman on that planet. He has figured out this about reincarnations, and he is scared of death, so in order to prevent his reincarnations from ever dying, he just goes around killing people to increase the amount of people that need to be saved. Anyway, he comes to the main universe and possesses Hawkman, and then Space Cop Hawk Girl or Hawkwoman helps to stop him. Now, you may be wondering exactly who Shura or the mysterious red haired woman and that mysterious voice are. You're in luck. It's simple. Shura was an angel who sensed good in Qatar and attempted to coax him to do good. In the process, she pretty much just kind of stood by and watched as he murdered untold numbers of people, defying the mysterious voice's wishes. As a result, the voice binds her to him in reincarnation and gives her the same condition as him, which is to save that many lives. And in case you didn't figure out, that voice is God. This is a whole other thing I am not getting into here, but it does mean that Hawkman is divine in origin now, as is Hawkgirl and Hawkwoman. Anyway, the two Hawks, specifically Hawkwoman and Hawkman, eventually fight the Lord Beyond the Void, who eats the souls of their past lives. It's too many, however, so he dies. Then they die, and they are returned to the now empty field of skulls as Qatar and Shura. There, they choose to become unaging mortals instead of going to heaven. This means they're becoming the Egyptian Hawks again, specifically the ones from the 1940s, and reliving those adventures. But this time, they've got memories of all of their past lives. The book ends after they fight Hathset for one last time. This ending is pretty definitively dubiously canon, largely because it raises several issues about the timeline and how the Hawks interact with it, but it should be fine as long as everyone ignores it, which has happened so far. Kendra is also in the Justice League at this point. This is more or less happening at the same time as all that Hawkman stuff I just mentioned. But like before, I'm talking about it this way so it's easier to follow. This is also where Hawkwoman first reappears. Here is the Empress of Thanagar Prime, the new Thanagar designed to serve as a backup for the previously destroyed ones, sort of. Also, Qatar is alive again. He's not entirely himself and completely lacks memory. This is because Shayera's been messing with this artifact called the Absorbicon and using it to warp reality. And then eventually she stops and Qatar fades into dust. At the end of this storyline, Will Peyton Starman takes a bit of Kendra out of Shayera, making Kendra whole again. It's not her soul, but what exactly it is a little unclear. There's also a Kendra solo comic in 2023 where she gets rid of all of her past lives, completely ignoring that this is something that has already happened, maybe. But since it was Space Cop, the Shayera, who did it. I'm not entirely sure of the mechanics of this. I'm just willing to throw my hands up and say it makes sense. The space cops are older life than the 40s Egyptians, so she probably shouldn't have many of them anyway. Of course, not one to be outdone by his parents. There is a new version of Hector Hall introduced around this time. Here it's spelled with a K and he's called Changeling. He made a single appearance, a backup story in Superboy and Man of Tomorrow 6. He's from the DC Round Robin, which is a vote on several pitches. The pitch that focused on him didn't win, so there's only 5 pages of it. The winner was a Superboy book he's in. These pages are dubiously canon. I'd say they probably aren't, but they do add an additional wrinkle, so I feel like I have to mention this. This Hector is supposedly the son of Egyptian Hawkman and Hawkwoman. This has never come up again, and there's probably more to this pitch, but we'll never see it. This is like 50% of the reason I talked about Hector earlier. Charlie also shows up again in this Wade Teen Titans book. He's just kind of there as a normal guy, having retired from superheroics. Given that this book is supposed to take place in the past, everything about him being Thanagarian still could have happened, but there's nothing about that, so it's up in the air. At the current moment, Kendra and Carter are currently appearing in Lemire's Justice Society, which is a pretty good book. Shiera, who is alive again, has had some appearances in some Green Lantern comics that you can read. Some of you also might be familiar with Wade's New History, the DC Universe. It does talk about the Hawks briefly. Issue 1 is the relevant one here. It says this about the Hawks in the picture section, and this is what it says in the timeline section. It's worth noting that this is not correct. Shura never was a Deathbringer, and the Egyptians aren't Thanagarians. The one last thing I want to say before I go, though, is that reading this did really give me an appreciation for Hawkman. I think Hawkworld is a very interesting pair of books, and I've already reread that first many a few times. They are surprisingly consistent characters quality-wise. Not quite to, like, the Daredevil level, but I definitely read more good and decent comics doing this than bad ones. It was an enjoyable time, and even though there's definitely eras that I'm never going back to, mostly the New 52, I enjoyed this. It was fun to do this.